One of the most important things that we can learn as a computer programmer is how to translate English sentences that we know how to speak and English concepts that we know how to communicate in our native language into code. So for this video, we're going to look at the use of any and all, because there's a really common mistake made when you try and look at something like, does a list contain any positive numbers? And I want you to focus on the any, because that's a key word here. So I've got some code. I import random. This block right here just creates a list of 10 random numbers between -200 and 10, so we don't need to dive into it in any more detail than that. And then I have a function right here. And right off the bat, I want to tell you that this function is broken and it doesn't work. So does the numbers list contain any positive numbers? This function should return true if there are any positive numbers in numList, and otherwise it should return false. And actually, let's print out numbers so we can see what's in it. Just make sure. And then we'll run our code. Okay, so I'm going to print out numbers. I'm going to run contains positive to see if it contains any positive numbers, and then I'm going to print the result. So let's see. Okay, so I run the code here, and it has all negative numbers, and then it prints out false. So does it contain any positive numbers? It does not, and it returns false. That's correct. Okay, so far so good. We might think that we wrote this correctly. Let's change this ever so slightly to make it 100. Run it again. All right, does this contain any positive numbers? It does. It returned true. It seems like our code is correct. Now let's read it and see what happens here. Okay, so we check if this contains any positive numbers. We get the num list. We loop through each number in the num list. Right, so the first time we go through, it'll be 51. And we check if n is greater than 0, return true. And it returns true right away. All right, and otherwise, it's not a positive number, it returns false. At first glance, this looks correct. But there's a critical issue here. Let's run it one more time. Okay, that's not the random results I was going for, so let's run it again. All right, here we go. So we have this list right here. And here's a positive number right there, 19. No negative sign out front, but it says false. Does this number list contain any positive numbers? This reported false, even though there's clearly a positive number right there. Okay, what in the world happened? So I'm going to use this as my number list. So instead of creating the random numbers up here, I'm going to comment this out. And I'm going to use this input. And I'm going to see what happened using my debugger. Okay, I'm going to step into the debugger. It's this down blue arrow with a blue dot beneath it. So I click there. Now I'm in debugging mode. I'm running this first line of code. I'm going to use the swooping down arrow that swoops over a little blue dot. Press that. So now I create the numbers list. This line of code, it actually does do something. What it does is it saves this function that I've created into memory so that we can call it later on. When I press the step over next function call button, the swooping blue arrow, I'm going to go down below to my code down here. I'm going to print numbers. Great, we see it appear down at the bottom. Now I don't want to click that swooping again. Notice when you hover over it, it says step over next function call. But I want to step into the next function call. So I go back to that straight down blue arrow and I click that one. And now I've jumped into this function right here. Okay, so I click the step into subroutine. And I'm going to check if n is greater than 0. Now, I actually closed a window where you could see the value of n. But we know that the value of n is -189. All right, so the value of n is -189. That's not a positive number. So when I step again, and I'm using the straight down blue arrow now, I jump past this return true and I jump straight to the return false. Here's the problem. When I click that down blue arrow again, I've left that function behind. I'm no longer up here in this code. Now I'm down here in the result, because that's what return does. Return exits this function. I've finished this function once I've called return. That's not what I wanted. I needed to check all these other numbers in this list so that I could get to the 19 and see that, yes, there is a positive number in there. So the problem that I have, actually I'm going to finish this debugging here. So we'll step over, and we'll exit. Great. So I've run my program. I'm all done now. The problem here is this if-else. If the if statement is not true, the else has to run. One of these two things will always happen. And if there's a return in both, we're going to be finished with our function before we've even repeated our loop even once. So what we really need to do is we need to check through and see, are any of the numbers positive? And if they are, we'll return, and that'll be good and fine. And once our loop is completely finished running, only then do we know that there's no positive numbers in that list. So this is what we really want. I'm going to run the code now. All right, now it says true because there is that positive number, that 19, in this list. All right, so what I changed was I deleted the else. I unindented the return false so that it was outside of this for loop. This is how we check if there are any of something in a list. We have to check every single item because it could be anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be the first value. When I ran those first examples and they weren't the examples I wanted, it was because I was getting, I'm scrolling up now, I was getting a positive number as that first value. So yeah, it worked because it was only checking that first value. But I've got to check every single value. And this is how we check if there's any of something in a list. Okay, I'm actually going to show another example. So I'm just going to delete this. Move some code that I already wrote up onto the screen. So what if we want to check if all items in a list have some property? So do we want to see if all the numbers in a list are negative? I have a very similar function call right here. I have to actually call it though, so I'll change this right down here. So now I'm calling this function. I loop through all the numbers in my number list and I check, is the number I'm looking at greater than or equal to 0? And if it is, I return false because all the numbers are not negative, right? If the number is greater than or equal to 0. Otherwise, I'm going to return true. I'm going to use my same exact list right here. So random has served us. It's created a nice example for us. We don't need it anymore. So I'm going to run this program. Now, a reminder, I'm looking to see, are all the numbers in the list negative? And I'm using this list. And it says true, which is incorrect. Because this number, this single 19 right here, this single positive number, is not negative. So I should not have returned false. But again, the issue is that I'm only doing one of these two things, and I'm never checking any of the other values in the list. I'm never getting past that negative 189. The solution is the exact same thing as before. I have to get rid of this else, and I can't return true until I've already checked everything in the list. So very similar to any is all. Are all the numbers in the list negative? Well, I have to check every single number right here, and I'm only going to stop if I've figured out that they're not all negative, so I'll return false. And otherwise, if I make it past this code, then I know that they are all negative, and I can return true. So when I run this code, I will get a false value, right? And that is correct because this 19 here is positive. And this works for just about any sort of any or all question that you would want to ask. So I have some more hidden code down here at the bottom. Are all the numbers in the list multiples of 3? So I use n%3 does not equal 0. So if it's not divisible by 3, it's not a multiple of 3, I'll return false. And this will not work. This is not correct. We got to get rid of this else. We got to unindent this return true. And now I can check. Now I didn't actually confirm. Oh, here we go. So this is multiple of 3. So this should, but they're not all multiples of 3. So this should return false. All right, here we go. Great, and it returns false.